Hello, I'm Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like. The purpose of this channel is educational in regards to atheist and deconversion issues, and Bible, theology, politics, philosophy, and any other subject that comes up in relationship to those issues. Today I want to get officially going the Tall Tale of Jesus series 2.0. I want to stress that in this particular case that I'm basically trying to redo my harmony of the Gospels, and this is the 2.0 version, although I will not probably put that on there because I want to redo this series as a way of introducing a few technological elements and also talking about some of the other things that we need to talk about. But I wanted to just address, first of all, our three criteria by which I am judging every section of the Gospels that we're dealing with. Number one, we're going to talk about whether or not the Christian claim of 2 or 3 witnesses on each and every event of the life of Jesus Christ as recorded in the Gospels is actually true. Whether what we do see is actually 2 or 3 witnesses, or a bunch of witnesses that are hodgepodge, or maybe there's some sort of questionable nature of the witnesses in general. There's also going to be some sort of historical or critical analysis as well. I will point out various things that I know that are wrong or right about the text, and we'll head from there and go on. The other thing I want to deal with, though, is how the evidence for a growing legend theory might be viable. I want to make myself abundantly clear. This is my own personal theory about how I think the life of Jesus Christ actually went, based on what clues I can glean from the Gospels and history. But I realize that the mythicists may very well be right. I also realize that other alternate theories could also be proposed that could also be equally valid. The one thing I'm not going to probably propose is something that will probably disappoint all Christians, which is that the story is true. Now, today I want to talk about, first of all, the first section, and I'm using A.T. Robertson's outline basically to do everything that we're dealing with here, mostly because he's well established. The book was published in 1922, so it's been around for almost 100 years. Next year it'll be around for 100 years. So it's one of those texts that a lot of people turn to when they're trying to harmonize the Gospels, still to this day. And I'm just going to use it as my outline. I could probably have picked any harmony of the Gospels. There might be some variance in some of the events, but I think A.T. Robertson will do me fine, and will definitely deal with the text. So what is the text for today? Well, we're dealing with Luke chapter 1, 1 through 4. Now, the first thing I can point out to you is that the Gospels are, I believe, written in a certain order. I believe Luke wrote third, but it's telling that Mark and Matthew don't have any introductory words about their methodology or anything else. Mark pretty much starts the story of John the Baptist, and Matthew kind of kicks things off with a genealogy. So none of that is really talking about the method in which the gospel writer went forward with his text. So when we come to this text, Luke 1, verses 1 through 4, Luke is actually kind of giving us, hopefully, a synopsis. Now, whether or not it's Luke or not, that's what I'm going to keep calling it the Gospel of Luke, even though I personally don't think Luke wrote it. But we're going to look at it from a standpoint of saying, hey, what can we glean from this passage, and what did the early believers believe about Jesus, and what could they verify? All right, so Luke 1, 1 through 4. Since many have undertaken to compile an account of the things accomplished among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who were from the beginning, were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, it seemed fitting for me to, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write out to you in an orderly sequence, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the exact truth about the things which you have been taught. I want to, basically note a couple of things in this passage right away. And that is that there were other accounts of Jesus that the writer knew about, that he was in his own way attempting to write what he felt was his own account, trying to beginning, with what he wanted to try to do with his account. Now, the problem with this passage, and it's a big problem, is that it's anonymous. What we don't know is who wrote this book. Now, I have said repeatedly I'm going to grant the assumption that Luke is the writer to the conservatives, even though I don't believe that is true. The thing about all the Gospels that you have to remember is that there are no names that this Luke wrote Luke, or Mark wrote Mark, or Matthew wrote Matthew. These all come later as a result of church tradition. But we have no authorship claimed here. Now, from a historical verification standpoint, that's very problematic. We don't know who's writing, and so we don't know anything about this. The other thing is, he uses the idea of eyewitnesses, but he doesn't tell us who they are. So we simply have the author's word that he is taking things from people who are eyewitnesses and servants of the Lord. But verse 2 indicates that these stories were handed down by those who were from the beginning were eyewitnesses. And so, in other words, the writer himself is openly admitting that he is not an eyewitness, but he has received these accounts second, third, fourth hand from those that were. But we don't know who he is, so we can't verify that he had any connections to the people that were eyewitnesses or servants of the word. What this actually does is a lot of people think that this really proves the point of eyewitnesses, but it does quite the opposite. It basically adds a whole slew of questions that we can't verify, we can't look at. It actually undercuts the historicity of Luke because we don't know these things, and it could have very well just put things in place. A lot of people like to point to investigated carefully from everything in the beginning. But the thing is, we don't know what he considered the beginning. We don't know anything about this author other than he claims to have investigated everything from the beginning. Now, part of the problem that this writer may have actually been dealing with was there were a lot of Gospels out there. By the time this writer writes, there's tons of them. He's trying basically to look at all the oral traditions, look at the Gospels that have already been written, and trying to make some heads or tails of it, because up until that point, obviously, nobody had really done what he's trying to do, which means the Gospels that are presented before are at best chaotic, and at best really don't help the cause one way or the other. So Luke is actually trying to set the record straight, indicating that he doesn't believe that the record has been set straight before, that he's trying to get an orderly count. Now, the address to who this is to is Theophilus, which simply means lover of God. A lot of people think that this is just a euphemism for anybody who reads this gospel, and that anybody who's a lover of God who reads this account will get an orderly account as best as the writer can say. But from a historical standpoint, we don't know who the writer is, we don't know who his eyewitnesses are, and we don't know what all the other accounts that he is dealing with really truly are. We have some definite suspicions that he used Mark. In fact, it's pretty clear he did. It's also not clear whether Matthew borrowed from Luke or Luke borrowed from Matthew, or they both borrowed from a third source, commonly known as Q. So what we don't know about this passage is not helped. From a historical narrative standpoint, this doesn't really help us. So how does this help us with our criteria? Well, first of all, Luke is a single witness. He is the only guy that claims that he heard all these things from eyewitnesses. The other books don't make that claim. He is the only one, so he is alone in that claim. He brings forth none of the witnesses, nor tells us who he is. And so, yeah, on the 2 or 3 witnesses, it fails on a multitude of levels to reach that particular criteria. From a historical criticism point of view, I don't know who the author is. I don't know who his eyewitnesses are. I don't know which accounts he's referencing. And so I can have a suspicion that he referenced, say, Mark and Matthew because of the direct copying that I can see, but I don't really know anything other source that he's referencing. He literally leaves us far more questions than he answers. As far as an actual historical criticism, once again, fine. I'll grant to the conservatives that this was written by Luke in the 1st century. The problem with that is I don't think so personally. I think it was written more in the 2nd century, probably after Mark and Matthew were written. And it's because there was so much confusion about the various gospels that were being written in the first 2 centuries of the church. Everybody seemed to have an account of Jesus, and everyone's account seemed to be growing and getting bigger. So what evidence is there in this passage of a growing legend? Well, it's pretty clear that the writer was painfully worried, maybe perhaps concerned, that a lot of these other accounts of Jesus were more chaotic. He's trying to put an orderly account, an orderly fashion to them. He's also looking at all these other gospels as perhaps not the most accurate things that he could look at. It's also clear that the writer of Luke also really wanted to put his own take on the legend. He does a lot of things that are truly, truly unique to his gospel that aren't in any of the other ones. And that kind of undercuts not only the 2 or 3 witnesses, but it also indicates that he had a certain axe or pension to grind. This means that Luke stands in some ways, because of this introduction, as questionable right out the gate, because he doesn't give us all the things we would need. Now, other people would say, well, the writers back then didn't really know what historical criticism is. Except the problem with that is if God were to know, and he is inspiring this word, then he would certainly have caused the gospel writers, all of them, to name who they were and thus prove that they were maybe disciples or eyewitnesses of Jesus. They wouldn't have proven it because a lot of gospels and other letters were written with false names. 2 Peter is probably a really good example. But at the same time, we just don't know who these witnesses are that he's talking about. He could have verified a lot of things for us by simply saying, I concurred with this disciple, that eyewitness, and actually have given us a list of names that we could have looked at and verified. But he doesn't do that either. The fact is, God knowing the future and knowing how things were going to play out, he certainly would have inspired the Gospels in a different way that would have answered all of these questions throughout history and throughout time. It would have actually been more proving that the Bible is indeed inspired in the Word of God if it actually gave us something that was better and a better methodology of doing things. But the writer of Luke doesn't do that and kind of leaves us hanging. We have a claim that he is writing down things orderly from eyewitnesses, but we have no evidence. He gives no evidence. And so therefore, I can dismiss that claim without evidence just as easily. I don't have to have it. I can just dismiss the claim. So Luke 1:1-4, it fails a historical analysis. It's the only gospel writer that writes like this, so he's witnessing only of himself. And quite frankly, I think it kind of does hint that there was already a growing legend, and the writer of Luke was probably trying to put a lid on that. I want to thank you for stopping by. I appreciate you coming along and listening to me look at the tale of Jesus Christ in a little bit different format from an atheist standpoint. And I appreciate everybody who comes by here and just watches my videos, and I appreciate every like, subscribe, and every share helps the channel, and so I appreciate that. And if you're also interested, you can also follow me at the Rabyd Atheist on Facebook. There is a growing community there, and I do appreciate that. But that's also a good way to get the announcements about this channel, because I tend to write those things out there because Facebook seems to be my medium that I use most often. Once again, thank you for stopping by, and I appreciate you coming and taking a listen to The Tall Tale of Jesus, Part 1. And I hopefully can someday convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Ed Rabyd, also known as the Rabid Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.